Good afternoon and welcome to Estate Planning for Pets. My name is Cheryl Nolan and I'm here with Daniel Weiner, and I'm very excited to be presenting this particular topic. It's a topic that I've been wanting to present for many years now, and it's been in my to-do list. So I know that you're going to get a lot of great substantive information as well as some great self-help tips for non-lawyers. So let me begin with Daniel. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, it's great to be here. Thank you, Cheryl. So I'm Dan Weiner, founder of Weiner Law. We focus on estate planning, and that's for assets, people, and pets. And we do probate and trust administration as well. Briefly, by way of background, so I spent 10 years at the international firms in London, which is where I'm from, as well as Hong Kong and in DC, before I set up my firm here 3 or 4 years ago now.
And Daniel, when we met, we were talking about the crossovers between animal law and estate planning. And I had shared with you the fact that although I do all animal law, I personally don't do estate planning, and I'm always on the lookout for solid professional firms to refer my clients to. So that I'm really pleased to have you here, and thank you for the information you're about to share.
Of course. Thank you for inviting me, Cheryl. I appreciate it.
And my name is Cheryl Nolan. I have Nolan Animal Law. And what you see here is a list of the general areas of law that I handle. Over the years, it has become a little bit more fine-tuned than in earlier years. But essentially what it focuses on is equine issues and farm animal issues, veterinary pharmacies. I have some pharmacy clients who do veterinary medications online and through their retail stores. I do co-venture agreements between retail establishments and nonprofits. And then I also help people, pet owners particularly, who believe that there's some professional liability with regards to their pet, either through a veterinarian, a trainer, a groomer, or someone who comes in contact with their pet on a professional basis. I also get calls and help people when their pet has, mostly it's dogs, injured or killed by another animal or another human. I'm doing some dog bite defense. That should contrast, I don't do any personal injury. So any dog bites on humans, I refer out to personal injury law firms. I do quite a bit of service dog and emotional support dog questions in the employment arena and in housing arenas. I advise HOAs, land employers about how they can make the process compliant with federal and state laws, and also open up access for people who have service dog and emotional support animals. I do quite a bit of custody and ownership disputes, and my non-traditional survey of lawyers across the nation is that our percentage of custody title disputes are about between 40 and 60% of our caseload. The reason I highlight this is because as we get into the estate planning, you're going to learn about a lot of legal tools that will help prevent these very same problems. I do some lemon puppies, puppy scams, people who buy puppies online. Those are really problematic. And then I also do concerns with breeder co-ownership, guardianship, and foster contracts. And I represent both breeders and buyers. So for today, our plan is, I'm going to just give you a little bit of foundation of what is pet law. And then Dan's going to go into estate planning foundations. I will talk briefly about some animal law and pet owner pitfalls that I see. And then Daniel's going to round it out with other alternatives. And then we're going to talk about some, other options that are out there and open it up for questions. So this question, is pet law a thing, is hands down the #1 question I get asked no matter where I am, whether I'm out in public or with lawyers. Every day, all day, this question is presented to me. And, basically it's just any issue, dispute, transaction where pets or animals control how you handle the matter. The other question I get, hands down, the second question is, how did you get into animal law? And my story is interesting. I grew up with a crazy dog lady mom who was a dog trainer. We showed dogs, we bred dogs. And so my life was 24/7 dogs. And by the time I graduated college, I kind of wanted nothing to do with it at all. And I was done with it. And I thought I was going to be a lawyer doing non-animal stuff. But I found out you can't hide from destiny. So animal law came across my desk, and I saw it as a really exciting opportunity to use my background and my fluency in this world to help my clients. So animal law, more and more, we know that households are owning, we call them animal companions in the animal law world, or non-human animals is the other term that we see. But we're seeing more households with animals also moving into equine, more farm animals as pets and exotics. The data is showing that we are spending more money on our animals than ever before, and every year that is increasing exponentially. We also spend more time with our animals. You probably see people walking around with their dogs in public, in the stores, in strollers, all kinds of places. Animal lawyers are seeing greater contention and disputes over animals, especially during COVID. We saw that our contentious cases were on the rise. And yet few prioritize planning for the future of their pets, and animals and their owners realize that this oversight when it's too late, usually when they come to me and they don't want to hear about what they should have done to prevent it. Custody, possession, and rights of title issues seriously make divorce court look like child's play, and it keeps us animal lawyers very busy. I told you earlier, 40 to 60% of our cases come from these disputes. And like with estate planning, I also do not handle married partners. Any issues with married partners, I refer to family law lawyers. And so I handle unmarried partners, roommates, pet sitter boarding situations, breeder contracts, rescues, shelter adoptions, lost and found, claims of abandonment, and outright theft. So that's kind of the span of how a custody dispute will come up. And if you don't have the proper estate planning documents in place, that can weaken your position to fight for your rights. Okay, other pitfalls, putting your pet at risk. So this little picture here is my own dog. But he's so cute. So here's some things that people do that get them at risk. They think that other people value pets the same as they do. They think that others have control of their pet's behavior like you do. They don't vet caregivers or others that they allow to have possession of their pet. So they'll just hand over their pet to maybe an acquaintance or a friend of a friend. They have a pet sitter they haven't fully vetted. And also I can tell you from experience that the bond between a human and a pet can happen very quick, like in the span of hours. And once another person bonds with your animal, it makes it that much harder to reverse it, to get that animal out of their possession. The other pitfalls are not communicating with your veterinarian, who has right of access to records and who has the right to pick up your pet. So again, it's almost like child custody, like letting the school know who can pick up your child. It comes up a lot like this with pets. Not licensing or keeping your microchips updated. People just kind of think, not that important. And then they realize that those are ways to establish ownership. And finally, not coordinating with your local shelter for after death or lost pet instructions. So if you have a license, especially here in San Diego, you can coordinate with the Humane Society and give them names of neighbors or family members, trusted partners or family members who would be able to care for your animal should something happen to you. Or you can also appoint the Humane Society as the recipient of your pet after your death, and then they will then rehome that pet, provide it with its necessary vet care and any training that's necessary. So just not considering your local shelter can be a real major pitfall. Reasons why animal lawyers lose sleep. Number 6, like I said earlier, just giving people transfer their animals to all kinds of people. It surprises me all the time. No express agreements or poorly drafted agreements. I get a lot of poorly drafted agreements. Even more so, I get documents that are cobbled together from online sources with a lot of legally unenforceable clauses, both from rescues, but also just individuals looking to set up a contract with a pet sitter or a dog trainer or whatever, or groomers that do their own, just basically anybody. They think they can just put it together on their own and that's going to be adequate. Aside from agreements, a lot of problems come up from inadequate or lack of instructions, lack of funding, lack of compensation. So you don't pay the person who has possession of your animal, you don't have enough funds to pay for their care, or you don't give enough instructions. And so you leave them kind of trying to figure it out. And that is another area where people start feeling like they have the greater rights of ownership. They're a better owner than you, and then they assert their rights to that animal. And I've seen it happen with farm animals. I've seen it happen with horses. I've seen it in all arenas. Failure to provide for emergency or lengthy absence. I mean, these things happen, right? You don't plan for it, but something happens. And again, the more time that an individual or a party or organization has your pet, the more time they're going to bond with it and decide that they have greater rights. And finally, my top number one things that keep me up at night are dog parks, dog beaches, off-leash recreation. Oh my goodness, please don't. They drive me crazy. They result in dog bites, dog attacks, assaults on people from other people, dogs attacking other dogs, and theft of pets, which I have had numerous cases where strangers stole a pet from the dog park, and that resulted in a very lengthy court dispute that cost a lot of money. Okay, so Dan, this is a good time for you to take over and tell us how we can prevent these things.
Okay, sounds good. Well, on the slide there, we've got the two little human pets that I have. We thought it would be too much work to get a dog, so we got them instead. But as it turns out, we were wrong about that, and now obviously they want a whole bunch of pets. So we're gonna end up with everything. But Cheryl, if you want to move forward, great. So to talk about pet planning and pet trusts, it's really going to make much more sense if I set this in context. And how do pets fit into estate planning in general? What is estate planning in general? Why should people care about it? Why should you do it? And why should you do it properly? And what it's essentially all about is, if something happens to you or your clients, if you were to become incapacitated or after you pass away, then if you have not made a plan yourself, the state of California has a plan that it will impose on you, and it will impose its plan for your assets, for your children, and for your pets. So you won't have any say in what happens. And when it comes to assets to begin with, because assets are obviously relevant to, if you're going to create a trust for your pets, then we need to have assets that are going to be able to fund that trust. What happens to your assets in California if you don't have a plan that you've made yourself? And if we can go forward, Cheryl. So the thing that happens to your assets is a court process. And if you become incapacitated, that court process is known as conservatorship. And after you pass away, that court process is known as probate. And what that essentially is that a judge at the end of this court process is going to be the one to transfer your assets to your heirs, to your children, or whoever is the closest family member. And during that court proceeding, your children, your family are not going to be able to access any of the assets. So what is so terrible about probate that so many families try to avoid their loved ones having to go through it? There are a few reasons for that. So one is that it's incredibly expensive. So a good estimate is that it can wipe out 5% of what you leave behind just in court filing fees, attorney fees, premiums, everything that goes into that court process. So it is expensive. It is also extremely time consuming. So in California, this is probably the worst state in the nation when it comes to probate. The courts are completely clogged up. 18 months is a good estimate for how long your loved ones are going to have to spend in this court process, even for a relatively simple estate. You know, we're filing probate petitions right now, and the initial hearing is 6 months out. I've got another client of mine who he is about 2.5 years into the probate for his mother's estate, and this was not a complex situation. So without doing proper planning, people are really lumbering their family with this really difficult court process at a time when they're grieving. Next slide, please. And the other thing about probate courts is it is completely public. So everything that you thought was private, everything, you know, your assets, what you had, who you're leaving things to, you know, if you don't do any planning, or if you just make a will and you don't have a trust, then everything, all your private affairs are now public for anyone to go down to the courthouse and find out, which is why if anyone's interested in Jackie Kennedy's will, you can go and see who she left things to, who she didn't. So anyone that cares about privacy needs to do some planning. And the other thing about not doing any planning, and if you have children, is if something was to happen to the parents before the children turn 18, then whatever you left behind is going to be held by the court until they turn 18. But at that time, everything will just be distributed into their bank accounts without any supervision and any accountability. And, you know, at my firm, we see every day the consequences of children coming into large sums of money and not knowing what to do with it and having their lives seriously impacted by that. So another reason to avoid probate and plan. So creating a trust is a way to avoid all of those nasty probate consequences. And that's a pretty common thing to do in California for anyone that has, you know, any level of assets. If you own a house or if you have investments, then avoiding probate is the thing to do. And to do that, you need to create a trust. In a nutshell, a trust is really just an agreement. So if it's for a single person, it's really an agreement with yourself. If it's a married couple that we're dealing with, then it's an agreement between each other. There are three main roles when you create a trust. There's the grantor, the person who is creating it. There's the trustee, which is the person who holds the assets for the benefit of the beneficiaries, that's the third role in all of this. And the kinds of trust that we normally create for people involves, you know, you being all three of these roles. So what that means, and the great thing about this kind of trust, a revocable trust, is that you're not giving up any kinds of control of your assets when you create one. So you're as in control as you are now, and it's fully changeable. So as your circumstances change, you can change the plan. And a bit later, we'll talk about pet trusts, but the principle applies just the same here. You know, you can, just because you think a certain setup for your pet is right today, it might be different in a year's time or 18 months. So, you know, as things develop, you would change the terms of your trust to keep up with that. The other big thing about trust planning is, and this is something that often gets lost, is that trusts only work if you go ahead and transfer ownership of your assets into the trust. So a lot of people try to do this themselves, or they'll find the document at, you know, online, wherever it might be, and they don't have anyone helping them to retitle their bank accounts and their investment accounts. And if they have minor children, you need to change beneficiaries on retirement accounts and life insurance. And without taking all of those additional steps, the piece of paper is useless. And, you know, we're working on a number of probates right now from people that created trusts, probably themselves, but never actually transferred assets properly. So the whole thing was a waste of time. And, you know, in that vein, all trusts are not created equal. There are are good trusts and there are bad trusts, and there are trusts with, you know, just as Cheryl was mentioning, the sort of unenforceable clauses that you find in certain documents that are floating around. You know, we see that all the time in these trusts, and they lull people into a false sense of security. So there's a lot of danger in using those. And I'll just give a couple of examples of how there are trusts and there are trusts.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, I'm sure, you know, like I like to think about I focus on the problems that come, and I'm wondering if these come to you after the trustor is deceased and they've got the paper in front of them, and then, you know, yeah, I want to hear more about what the problems are and the pitfalls and how that's handled.
Sure. So one answer to that question is this. So, you know, there's standard ways of doing trusts, and then there's more advanced kind of protective ways of doing trusts. And this is an example of, let's say you have children and you're doing estate planning and you're creating a trust, and it might be that you've decided you want to leave everything to them in stages. So you don't want to give them everything at 18 because you're worried they're going to blow through everything. So you say, okay, age 25, they get a third, 30, they get a third, and then 35, they get the rest. When you're doing sophisticated estate planning, the question then becomes, well, what happens if they get everything at the age of 35 and then they get divorced at 38, or they get sued at 38, or something happens? Everything is then exposed. So are you okay with that situation, or do you want to leave everything to them in a more protected structure so that if those divorces and other things do happen, the inheritance that you've worked hard for is going to be protected? So what we usually recommend is creating what we call a lifetime asset protection trust for each child. And the child could take control of that trust at a particular age. It might be 30, it might be 35, but their inheritance is staying in that trust forever. So if they get divorced, if they get sued, if they become bankrupt, you know, they'll be able to access the trust property, but it's going to be shielded in that situation. So that's just one example of the kinds of techniques and planning that you would be using working with somebody like me, but you're not going to be using if you're operating online, or you know, you're working with the firm that does estate planning on the side.
Yeah, and this is precisely why I don't do these cases, because I wouldn't know about that. I would be completely out of my field. So this is really interesting.
And just another quick example. So one of the big things within documents, one of the big features in trusts or in powers of attorney, is at what stage can somebody else step in and handle your affairs? So when can they step in and manage your finances? When can they step in and look after your pets and say, okay, you no longer have the capacity to be able to take care of these pets properly? What do we do about that? And usually within estate planning documents, to be adjudged incapacitated, you have to get 2 doctors to certify that. And I actually saw a power of attorney recently that required the doctors under penalty of perjury to confirm that the person is incapacitated. And you know, we're seeing so much increase in Alzheimer's, dementia. Some of it is slow onset. So in those cases, to be able to find a doctor who will actually certify that, especially under penalty of perjury, by the time you find those doctors, the person has totally either been scammed out of all their money because they're still in control of everything and they're subject to scams, or the pets are sitting there not being fed properly, not being taken care of, and no one's able to step in because no one can find the doctor who's going to certify incapacity. So one thing we look at, and it's not right in every case, is we can say in the documents, a disability panel can certify incapacity. And that could consist of very close family members or friends, people that you trust implicitly. They're the ones who know you really well, and they know when you've reached a point when you can no longer take care of yourself, your children, your pets. So that's the kind of conversation that we would have in the right situation.
So is there a percentage that you see more of people using doctors versus the panel?
So I'd say it's still more common for people to want to use doctors, just because, you know, we've all been conditioned to think that that's the right way to set these things up. But a number of people, I'd say a quarter of clients are interested in using the panel, and they can see the benefits of it. So
well,
sometimes they're just, you don't have that many people that you trust implicitly, and in that case you want the doctors to be on board.
Yeah, and well, you know, a lot of people don't realize too that failing to take a pet to the vet when it needs medical care or it needs their shots could make them vulnerable for a neglect and abuse charge, or even like hoarding or failure to feed, failure to provide proper shelter can expose that person to some criminal sanctions. The average person doesn't know that. And so, yeah, that makes it even more important to at least put in maybe just the panel, because they would see kind of the day-to-day activity and what's happening, the condition of the backyard, the house, the pet, and they would be able to, you know, bring that into the whole conversation about what's happening with that individual.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I wanted also just to mention healthcare decision making, because that's a big part of planning, you know, figuring out who should make your decisions, what kinds of healthcare decisions you would want made. Yeah, the Terry Schiavo case from the early 2000s is the one that a lot of people remember, and that really started the whole movement towards creating healthcare directives and living wills, where you say what kind of intervention you would or would not want, depending on what's going on. And when we're looking at pets, it's a similar story. You know, again, no one knows your pets better than you do. The medical history, the future medical needs, what you think they may be able to tolerate or not tolerate. And that very much has to be taken into account as part of pet planning.
Well, and I'll add, Daniel, that even I just took my dog in for surgery last week, and they had asked me, you know, did I want them to perform CPR if he arrested under anesthesia? And, you know, thankfully, from all my work on my other cases and looking at necropsy reports, I know that CPR, even if you revive the pet, is unlikely to work. And even if it works, that animal is probably going to arrest again. Yep. And so as I'm looking at the sheet, you know, I checked CPR, yes, do it. But then I said, but call me, like, you know, I think it's really not worth it. And so, I mean, even that is a decision that takes some information from your veterinarian, but it should be included in the overall plan. And that conversation should happen, you know, with the estate planning professional, but they should have some information from their veterinarian about that.
Absolutely, because no one wants their pet to be suffering unnecessarily and having to undergo certain treatments which are just going to cause a lot of pain.
Yeah, I have yet to see an animal that went through CPR that went on to survive and live a happy life. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so that's the framework of what estate planning is all about. Pet trusts, and this is, you know, we see this quite a lot. Obviously, a lot of our clients have pets, they care about them, they want to make sure that they're going to be taken care of if something happens to them. So, you know, the purpose of a pet trust is really, there's three things that this does. So it's going to, first of all, designate who's going to take care of the animal to avoid it from being taken to a shelter or whatever is going to happen. We need to ensure money is set aside for future healthcare and other needs of the pet. And we need to, in detail, provide guidance to whoever is going to be the caretaker as to exactly how the pet needs to be taken care of. So if there's a particular spa that it likes to go to, we need to specify that. If it's, every Thursday it goes to the hairdresser, we have to put all of that into the documents because no one's going to know.
Mm-hmm.
And the trust is usually, it comes into effect after somebody has passed away, but equally, as we were talking about before, if the owner is incapacitated, the provisions of the trust can then spring up and take effect. There's an interesting question around how long pet trusts can last for. So, the lawyers in the room will remember with horror the law school classes around the rule against perpetuity and how long trusts are allowed to last for. There are some differences between your trusts for humans and trusts for pets. The main one being you cannot provide for a trust for the offspring of your pets. So, if you've got 8 pets now, then the trust is going to provide for 8 pets. It's not going to cover any children that they have in the future.
Well, that's fascinating to me because my breeder clients or my people that have like horses that are breeding, like I could imagine they could get some really nice animals, and then so the breeding of them, that they would basically own the breeding, own the litters and the foals. And wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. And then this is often the big question that we get from our clients: how much money should go into the pet trust? I chose this picture because it kind of looks like my 4-year-old daughter. She gets dressed up like that. But this is the big question. So, and it's obviously unique in every situation. These are the factors that we're going to look at. What kind of animal are we looking at? Some are obviously a lot more expensive than others to maintain. How old is the animal, the health history and current condition, and how many animals are there? So, once you have those kinds of conversations, we're often able to come to some kind of number that is a projection based on all of that. And in a second, I'll take you through a little case study where we applied all those factors and came up with a number.
Oh yes, I remember this one.
Yeah, so this was a famous case. And that question, what happens to money that doesn't end up getting used, that you set aside in the trust? You have complete flexibility there to be able to specify. And a lot of people will name particular animal charities that should inherit the money after, if the pets don't use it all. Some people will say it should go to family members, to friends, or to other places, but it's important to say something in the trust so that we can cover that particular situation. And then the case of Leona Helmsley. So this was the property mogul in New York who died in 2007, and she actually created a trust for her dog, whose name was Trouble, and the amount she set aside was $12 million went into that trust. And as you can imagine, when you create a pet trust and put $12 million in it, not every family member of yours is going to be happy with that situation. So there was a lawsuit, the family all sued, and in the end, the judge reduced the amount that was going to go into the pet trust to a mere $2 million. And then $10 million was then sent over to her charitable foundation that benefited animal charities. So when you create a trust and you put in a really excessive amount of money, even if it's likely you'll end up winning the case, you're at least setting up the possibility for family members to be able to get together, create trouble, file a lawsuit, and go through the kind of turmoil that goes with that. So, part of the thing that we do in this process is we're counseling people to be sensible, be reasonable. Let's do this in a way that's not going to cause terrible trouble within your family.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so this is the example that we thought we would share. So Penny the pug was the client's dog that was at the center of all of this. And they were trying to work out how much money should we put into our pet trust. Mm-hmm. And these were the factors that we looked at. Average lifespan is 12 to 15 years. He was already 18 years old, diabetic, needed shots. So that was around 150 a month. He's on a special food regime and had digestive problems. That's another $100 a month, but still very active and enjoys the dog park. So, we thought that, or the client thought that he could last another few years. So projecting all of that forward, we ended up coming to a number of around $12,000 to fund into the pet trust. And that seemed to work for the client. And then we also laid out in detail all of the arrangements that were needed for medical and leisure of the pug. So that was all set out. And actually, just one other note here. Sometimes there's a question around, should the caretaker of the pet be the same person as the trustee? So the caretaker is obviously the person looking after the pet. The trustee is the money manager, the person with the purse strings. And sometimes you have a caretaker who's trustworthy, who's good with money, who you can give 12,000, 50,000, 100,000, whatever it might be, and that person's going to use it for the pet. Sometimes you don't, and they're not the same person, and that's okay. We can have a pet trustee who manages the finances, and then that person will be interacting with the pet caretaker, who will have to go to the trustee and ask for money whenever money is needed.
Is it possible that the pet trustee would be different than the trustee for the estate?
Sometimes it is, yeah, sometimes it is. The trustee for the estate, we're looking at, are they a pet person? Are they going to be interested in managing this? And sometimes they'll be very interested in helping the family and the children, and they're good with money, but no particular interest in dealing with this. So then we would name a separate trustee.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. That's an interesting case. Do you know how long Penny lived? Or is Penny still alive?
Penny's still around,
wow.
As far as I know. Yes.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah.
Okay. So now I'm transitioning to also share another alternative for trust estate professionals, but this is also information for non-lawyers. In this 21st century, pets are now considered parts of the family. In some states, they have quasi-property status, meaning they are a little bit more than property, but not quite the level of an individual human being, in different forms, right? So in California, in family court, judges at their discretion can handle pet custody disputes. And I think we're one of 3 or 4 states that allow that. New York, there's a court ruling in New York that found that actually said that dog was quasi-property and gave it an elevated status. So we're seeing some changes. And as such, there is, for trust and estate professionals, as Daniel was discussing, you need a plan for your client's pets that address the care and their needs of whether the client is still present. And pet plans in a will is just no longer enough. It's just not sufficient. And so map planning is another alternative. It's long and short-term care planning for pets, and it has been created by an attorney named Deborah Hamilton. I'm including her contact information in here, but she's also sharing that information to work with other lawyers on this to help with their clients. And so I'm going to share with you parts of her plan so that you can help navigate the journey that your pet takes when you as an individual can't care for it. So as the trusted estate and planning attorney, you need to be able to work with your clients and their pets if one of the 10 Ds happen. So death, divorce, delay, which is what I had mentioned earlier, like delay in travel or delay in ability to pick them up from the groomer, accidents, deployment. So we see this a lot. I have received a case I actually still have right now involving military personnel who leave for deployment and put their pets into what they believe is a professional boarding facility, only to come back from deployment months later and find that their dogs are in deplorable, almost fatal conditions. So that one would put it number 1 or 2. Disease, disaster, dementia. Daniel discussed that. Disease again. So I guess other diseases, domestic violence. So that actually is a major issue too. I see that come up a lot where parties will come to me and they've shared an animal with somebody and then there is domestic violence in the home. And those have to be handled very carefully. Denial. And then, for all of these, there's some kind of written plan in place. If you provide trust and estate services to pet owners, you can add this, join the MAP plan community. This is the website that you can connect to it with, and this will help you with making the plan and addressing the needs of your clients' pets, also help with appointing caregivers and helping with the written plan. A lot of this stuff, Daniel, your firm may already be doing, but I think, what she does with the long and short-term planning, because she's an animal lawyer and she also does animal law mediation, she sees some issues that I even haven't seen before. So it is interesting.
Yeah, no, I think that's very valuable.
And, the MAP plan is meant to meet everyone's needs. It's supposed to be for the animal, but also for the family and also families, family members and trusted caregivers. And it's Deborah's position that putting all of your clients' pet care plans in a will is now tantamount to malpractice because the client doesn't realize that they need to die for those plans to come to fruition. And in reality, it kind of leaves the pets in limbo. The client's not dead yet. So it is malpractice. And so you really need to go the extra mile for all of this stuff. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. So, the client builds the plan with the attorney and then it's incorporated into the pet trust. And then it also calls for a yearly check-in to address the changing needs of the pet. And I see this with my clients as well. Pets as they age, their needs change. And also your determinations about what you want to do with that pet may also change. And then also because of those changing needs, the trust and estate lawyer should have a soft touch. And this, I also know with my work, you're dealing with strong emotions and strong bonds. And also you need to kind of ferret out what your client's values are. And so I always come to that at the beginning of each of my meetings with my clients, and I have regular update meetings with them so that I can tailor how I'm communicating with them to their values. And so this is the contact information for Deborah. She also wrote this book, nipped in the bud, not in the butt. I bought that. I thought it was really helpful. I shared that with my staff. And she has a lot of social media, a really nice YouTube platform with a lot of videos. And she's really fun to talk to. So for all of the trust estate lawyers out there, I encourage you to contact her. And also for non-lawyers, she does mediation. And so for people in disputes, I'm a big fan of mediation. I'd rather cases be settled than end up in court any day. So she's just a really interesting and knowledgeable expert. So I see something in the chat, but before I'm going to get to the chat in a minute, but this is how you can contact Daniel Weiner. with his link to his website, email, and phone call. And Daniel is also extremely knowledgeable and a joy to work with and really easy to talk to. So for non-lawyers out there, I encourage you to contact Daniel. But I also, for other lawyers that don't do estate planning, I think, he's an excellent law firm to refer your clients to, because he really handles the cases in a comprehensive way. And yeah, he's at the top of my list for estate planning. And then this is my website. If there's not very many animal lawyers out there, I think in California, there's maybe 3 of us, maybe 2. And nationally, we don't have one in every state, but I am committed to mentoring new law students. I'm committed to helping other lawyers who are interested in bringing animal law into their existing practices. So for the lawyers out there, I encourage you to reach out to me. And for non-lawyers, if you or somebody unfortunately, I hope it doesn't happen, but has some kind of an issue around a pet, you can contact me.
And I'll just add, Cheryl's reputation in this area is second to none. So she is our go-to person for anything animal related.
Thank you, Daniel. So I'm going to read a question in the chat. It is, many pet owners, such as myself, have very good pet insurance policies to cover 90% of vet expenses. Would it be wise to add the pet trustee to the policy as well? I believe most policies have a clause about the named owner of the policy being who they make the reimbursement checks to. So Daniel, I want your input on this, but before your input, I just want to add that pet insurance policies I should have put that on my list of things. I'm just starting to get into how that impacts my cases. I think the data right now is that 6 or 7% of households right now nationally have pet insurance, but that's also growing. I was at a conference this year in New Orleans, and there were 4 different pet insurance companies there, but they told me that there's now probably about 10 or 12 different insurance carriers. And I saw the ABA just sent us a notice that they're offering a pet insurance plan. So I confess I don't have pet insurance yet, but I'm really interested in how it's going to impact my cases. So Daniel, could you speak to the question about, how to add the policy name with the trust?
Sure. I mean, usually, it's a good idea to name, if you've created a trust, to name the successor trustee of the trust as an additional insured on your policy. It's usually something that will be worked out in some form or another, because after somebody passes away, the insurance is gonna fall away anyway. But just to be prudent, it's good to have the trustee as the additional insured.
Yeah. Okay. And then they would just also forward that to the insurance carrier, and then when the trust became in effect, then that would be notified and the policy would just change.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, and it's talking about insurance, not pet insurance per se, but I'm a huge fan of adding to your homeowner's insurance a pet policy. If you have a dog that might have a bite history or even nips, an umbrella policy is really inexpensive and can really help you when there's any kind of allegation of a dog bite or even just an injury to a human. So too few people don't have those policies. Even tenants can have a tenant policy that will cover their pet. I know that some of the insurance policies don't cover certain breeds, but you could also try to look for other carriers that might cover your breed. So it's not exclusive, but I know that my case is that when they come in and they don't have any homeowners or renters policy to cover their damages claim, it makes it a lot more complicated. So I don't see that we have any other questions. Lisa, do we have any questions?
No, I don't see any right now. So anyone who's out there and has a question, don't be shy. Use the Q&A and type it in there. You can do so anonymously if you'd like to, and share your thoughts. While we're waiting, I did have one question, or maybe it's just more of a comment for both of you. I know in my case, I have 2 pets that are from a breed rescue. When I entered into those adoption contracts, I had to include, I had to agree to a condition that if I was no longer able to care for those pets, they had to go back to the rescue. So I just wanted to mention that as a potential issue that could come up in these scenarios, where if you had an estate plan that did something otherwise, you could end up at odds with your rescue.
Yeah, and I'm opposed to those conditions. I'm opposed to any conditions on any kind of contract when entity transfers ownership, because technically they're not you can't put conditions on a transfer of title, right? So I mean, on the one hand, it could technically expose that organization to liability would there be a dog bite, right? Because they're still asserting some ownership. But really those conditions are completely unenforceable. They're arbitrary. It really comes down to the organization or individuals believing that they have a superior right of ownership. So I'm strongly opposed to those. You see me shaking my head like I just, oh, I hate it every single time I get one of those cases. And for my clients that are rescues, I also review their contracts and I will remove those and I'll advise them against that because they're technically unenforceable. It exposes them to liability, but it sends the wrong message. So even if, you know, Mr. Weiner's firm received a client that had one of those contracts, I would advise them to proceed to put it in the trust and just ignore it like that. And really at the end of the day, the rescue would have to sue in court to enforce that. And that would have to happen in superior court, which is a very expensive, you're thinking like, you're looking at probably $50,000 in attorney's fees. So it's just not the way to go.
So we do have another question, and this one's addressed to Cheryl. Can you talk more about the issues you've come across with off-leash dog beaches and parks?
Yes, I can. So most of my cases go like this. You bring your dog there, your dog is walking along by you, or maybe it goes off and runs to play somewhere, and another person's dog will come up and they start playing rough, and then it turns into a dog fight. And usually both parties don't have experience in breaking up a dog fight, so then somebody will get bit. Somebody will get bit. So you've got a person dog bite, and then you've got dogs that many times one of the dogs dies. Usually it's a very small dog with a larger dog. And so you've got a dog death, you've got a dog bite on a person, either it's you, the client, my client, or it's the other party. And so that's one very common. So I had that at OB Dog Park, the OB Dog Beach. And thankfully we got that settled. So I try to settle those cases as best I can. And for me, what I do first is I evaluate whether it's more of a person being bit problem, like where are the greater damages? And if it's a person bite, I just refer the whole thing out and I'll consult with the personal injury lawyer on the dog aspects. But if it's just, you know, a dog bite, then I'll handle it on my end and try to figure out, you know, what are the damages and control those damages through a settlement or obtain those damages through a settlement. The other thing that happens though is dog parks. This happened at the dog park here in South Park. An individual stole someone's dog. The dog ran off and it's like out of your sight, right? So you're like socializing with your friends and it's like a really nice environment. Everyone's having a good time and you lose sight of your dog. Well, this other person, I don't know why, but just took a liking to that dog, picked it up, put it in his car and drove off. And it took Facebook to figure out where the dog was. And that case is still going on today in court. And that family that owns that dog is a military family. They are low income and the husband was on deployment when this happened. I mean, there's like a lot of personal issues that come up in these cases that make them really emotionally complicated. But yeah, I've never taken my dogs to dog parks for a variety. Like I had one dog that was aggressive to other dogs, so I just could never go there. But every single dog park case I come in with, there's some complication, and I just don't even see the use of using that to give your dog recreation. I think you can take your dog to a dog training class and keep it on leash. You can walk it around your neighborhood and keep it on leash. But I think dogs off leash where you're around other dogs and other strange people, the permutations are endless, but somebody will get hurt. And then the other thing is you don't know those individuals. So I've had individuals be threatened. I've had individuals be assaulted. Like, again, these are just strangers out there who make judgments about you or judgments about their control of the situation. It's just dangerous on so many levels. The final thing is, you know, this has happened a lot where people's dogs get stolen and then the party will contact the owner and like hold them hostage for money. And I had a client went to go obtain her dog and she paid the money and obtained the dog, and the dog was deceased in a wire crate. And so again, I can't say anything positive about anything off leash or any of those parks. I'm sorry. I know a lot of people love them, but you really put your dog and yourself at risk. Sorry, I talked a lot about that.
I can tell you're passionate about that one, Cheryl. So we have another comment and a question. The comment is from Dana, who says, I experienced an issue getting my mother's dog's veterinary records when she passed away, needed vaccine records to get the dog groomed. So that's a good point, maybe something to be considered in any kind of planning, that you have access
Absolutely.
to those records.
Yeah, I mean, there are ways around it, but people don't know that in California, as with most states, the veterinarians have to comply with pet HIPAA rules, just like our doctors. And so they have this hurdle where for them, their doctor-patient owner relationship is with the person who brought the pet in there. And so they technically do not have to release those records. However, I have been able to obtain those records for my clients in, different circumstances. And so you can obtain them. It's just you have to clear that hurdle that they're facing.
So one more question, and I think maybe this one's directed to Dan. To be clear, should ownership of the pet be transferred to the trust along with the proceeds for its care? And is there a recommended process for recording that transfer?
So no. So this is analogous to the situation with children. So the ownership or ownership of the pet will stay with the owner, and the trust will be used really to set out the financial arrangements as well as the more detailed health and upkeep arrangements for the pets.
Well, I thought this was I learned so much today, Daniel. Thank you so much. I've always said I don't do estate planning. I refer it out, and I'm glad you're always there for me to refer them. But I learned some things today, so that's really helped me know how to help prepare my clients.
Well, likewise, thank you for that. And absolutely, I mean, you're a wealth of knowledge in this area, so it's always fascinating to hear the kind of cases that you work on.
And I'd like to thank both of you for volunteering your time to do this today. I did think it was very informative as well. I just want to end by saying, for those of you who are looking for a CLE certificate for attending today, I will be emailing those out based on the Zoom attendance list. So be looking for that in your email. And then a final thought, we do have a link to a survey that you'll see when you leave the program today. We'd appreciate if you could take a minute or two to answer that for us. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.